Hello.
Good evening.
Hello,
Hi.
Sukanya. Good to meet you.
Yes, it's lovely to meet you as well. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the podcast as a host. And again, it's a great pleasure to be invited to host the podcast for Rahul. We are here to talk about education, to talk about your experience, to learn from your experience today. And I'm sure that there's so much that we have to talk about. And I doubt that we'll be able to wrap it all up in the brief 30 minutes that we have with you. But I will try my best to ask you pertinent questions, ma'am.
Looking forward. Let's start. Thank you, Rahul, for inviting me, and Mrs. Suri also for being here. Thank you, Sukanya, on behalf of Miranda House. We look forward to a fruitful conversation, and I hope it is useful for those who are listening.
A small introduction to Professor Nanda for the listeners. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Professor Bijayalaxmi Nanda, the principal of Miranda House and a professor in the Department of Political Science with a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her research focuses on gender, political theory, and human rights. Professor Nanda is a well published author and editor with works addressing critical issues like sex selective abortion, human rights, and social inequality. She's an active advocate I'm so sorry, advising on gender policy for government and non government organizations and contributing to global campaigns like 1 Billion Rising. Professor Nanda's work has been recognized with numerous accolades, including the Delhi University Vice Chancellor's Teachers Excellence Award. She's a tireless researcher and policy analyst, collaborating with national and international bodies on issues of gender equality, poverty, and child rights. For those who are listening, that's quite a lot of information to wrap your heads around and understand just how much work one person is capable of doing in the illustrious span of one's career. So,
Thank you, Sukanya, for that extremely generous and also seems like an introduction that I am really not, somebody that when you hear such introductions, you feel you're talking about someone else. It's very little, but you have really introduced me very generously. So thank you very much.
ma'am, your work speaks for itself.
Thank you.
So, as we begin, and since the Russell Book of Podcasts is about inspirational stories, about learning from those who are leading in the field of education and otherwise in influential areas that our children can aspire for, uh, please tell me a little more about what brought you to the podcast.
Well, when Rahul spoke to me, let me tell you, I hadn't heard of the podcast, but there was so much sincerity in the way he mentioned it, and there was a certain genuine and authentic interest, and I felt it was not a regular podcast, and there was more to it, just by the fact that a person who reaches out to you speaks to you in a manner in which the integrity of the podcast comes out very clearly with that. So I must say it was all about Rahul and how he approached me to speak on this, podcast. I also wanted to learn about it much more. From when I speak on it, I would get to know what the podcast is about. So I am guilty of not knowing enough about the podcast, but of course, I think it is Rahul's the genuine, loving, affectionate way that he reaches out and so authentic and so persuasive. So I must say, you owe it all to him for convincing me to be part of it.
Ma'am, as an educational leader and somebody who works with young people, young learners, students who are, trying out their bright ideas in the world outside of school where they are a little more cloistered and protected, what do you think of how the kids are doing these days and what kinds of things do you see becoming rising concerns for these children as they step into the world outside?
So this is almost I've taught for almost 3 decades and have been in this chair for some time. When I'm in this chair, I do less of teaching, but I do get to observe. I must say that issues of concern for young people as time passes, have changed considerably over the last 30 years or so. So in the beginning, when the annual mode of teaching that was there for colleges were not very, very different from schools. Of course, they gave young people the freedom to decide on certain things, but more or less they were aligned to the way in which school education was. But now colleges have a number of other associations. Now you have, there's a whole focus on internship, on employability, on entrepreneurship, on getting all the skill sets that are necessary. I believe what is also being told is that now a year is a generation, the kind of dynamic, disruptive learning systems that happen. So yes, young people are stimulated, they're excited, they want to be part of it, but it's a lot on their plate. And because of that, I would say that mental health is a major concern that has emerged. And especially with social media and the amount that it throws at you with all its pros and cons, I see that as a major concern for young people to be able to always be in this kind of a competitive mode. So the sense of let's say comfort, of some time to yourself, self-care, all of that, I believe, are concerns that need extra attention from institutions like ours, or positions like ours. Wherever you go in the world now, whether it is even a corporate sector, the style of leadership is nurturing. So earlier on, it used to be top down, authoritarian, but now everyone understands that workplaces or even educational institutions for young people, because they now you have much younger workforce. So the workforce is younger. There needs to be a more nurturing environment, more supportive environment, more compassion, in terms of how you lead. And yes, not all students are pitched at the same level. So how do you look at a transformational leadership which is able to support everyone and is more inclusive? And that's the focus that needs to be there. And I believe that young people are doing a wonderful job of moving forward. But for us who come from, let's say, from 30 years back, as working in this field, it's very important that we understand what these concerns are, and we view it with a sense of trust. I feel trust, compassion are the two most important elements of human nature that needs to be developed during this phase. So yes, for me that's important.
Two questions that come to mind immediately from what you're saying, ma'am. One is about the trust, empathy, and compassion that you're talking about, and how important it is in the current time and age for it to exist both from the educators to the students as well as vice versa. Because,
True.
as you said, that the young workforce is on both sides of the classroom.
I
So, as a
agree.
leader, ma'am, how are you envisioning
I
that growth?
I'm glad you brought it up, Sukanya. While I understand that the people in the chair, or let's say in authority positions, or in some kind of a hierarchical position, teachers, educators, they need to be having a sense of trust, empathy, compassion, and they should be able to do their job, whether they are in the workforce or outside it. That could be one, or even parents. There needs to
Mm.
be. But on the part of the youth, there should also be a trust, and they should also, I feel, there is a need for them not to cancel out a generation which has come out differently. It's like they have learned things differently, and now there is a whole lot of political correctness, there's a whole lot of understanding around inclusivity that wasn't there in the past. So a sense of the deficit there, and not canceling out. So I agree with you, and I'm glad you brought it up. There needs to be compassion on both ends. There needs to be understanding on both ends. There needs to be empathy on both ends. I always feel, if you are in a hierarchical position, the compassion has to be much more in you, because you are the one who at least makes the rules or is able to but I think on the other side, it should not be a confrontational relationship.
Mm.
There should not be canceling out of everything. So the ability to do that, that can only come about if it's a nurturing environment.
Very
And
true.
Yes, it will only come out if it is. But if it is not a nurturing environment, there will be confrontational elements on both sides. There will be repression on one end, and there would be confrontation on the other. Or there could be just passive acceptance on the other. And we don't want that.
Mm.
And so, therefore, I feel a conciliation of their interests with a sense of not canceling each other out, but learning from wisdom and experience, and yet being able to understand that the world has changed and we need to keep up with certain understandings, which are wonderful. I mean, I was just looking at diversity, inclusion, and the DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and I just saw another word that has emerged, which is called belongingness, and it's a new word. And I always try to see how that can be brought into the workplace, how we should feel we belong. Not just that you bring about equity and you bring about inclusion, but if I don't feel I belong, all your diversity, equity, inclusion is of no use to me. So belongingness, I felt, was a wonderful word. And also an idea of friendships, of I was also, there's a very interesting word that is there, of course, empathy, you said, but another word that I find very interesting, conviviality.
Mm.
Having, the collegiality, conviviality. Is it possible not to see each other as antithetical, and to create that sense of space, enabling space where we can be ourselves? Yes.
And you've brought me to my next question, which was going to be about all of these things and how they apply to our political atmosphere and the democracy at large as well. I find it very interesting that the democracy that our students are inheriting, that the young people in our society are now entering, is very vibrant when it comes to being able to, gather people around, being able to voice your opinions, particularly because of how media has changed the way that opinions are constructed and how that works. So, in the context of that, as somebody who has been looking both at generations of students going on to become responsible adults in society, as well as somebody who has a keen eye on political science, how do you see education and social media changing the way that children are approaching democracy?
You're right. It's a vibrant democracy. And with social media, especially with the fact that you can bring up issues which we weren't able to do in the past, and how can you use it to the best, to basically amplify your voice? It's basically a way to amplify your voice. Earlier on, we used to do movements. We were part of vibrant movements. Now, of course, you have it on your fingertip. I mean, it's a pro and a con, because there's
Absolutely.
one thing about being part of vibrant movements. It's not that you meet people, you discuss, you deliberate, you understand, and you are there, and you are learning from the movements, you are learning from each other. In social media, it's virtual, so you get to understand the issue, you are able to amplify your voice, but it's also some things, it can also have a kind of a cascading effect about which you are not very, you don't have the movement with you, you don't have
Mm.
people to be around you, so you are on your own then. So that has happened in the past. Let's take an example of the Me Too movement. If it did not have a ground level work around
Mm.
it, if the women's movement had not done the kind of work it did, and to bring rape and sexual harassment out to the open, it wasn't possible. But
Mm.
then, it comes out, but then it is not able to gain the traction that it requires in order to find. And then again, there is always, I think, with social media, there is always the fear that you will be left on your own, when it comes to the let's say the repercussions of it, the consequences of it. Within a movement, there is a certain level of comfort that you belong and people are around you. So as a young person, there's a need to keep that balance, because you will be a working person, you will be in a professional field. The social media footprint is huge, and I would treat it with great caution, and you are accountable. You are an adult doing adult things which have adult consequences. So you have to be very carefully negotiating that path. And I always say that, of course, you have the choice, but it should be an empowered and informed choice. And then, you should be developing that around you, your boundaries, the kind of boundaries I require for myself. You should also have that boundary for another person. So I feel it's a vibrant democracy, but it requires more ground level work. And I also feel that, like, there's something that Anthony Giddens talks about, and which is an important one, which is that of a democracy of emotions.
Mm.
So if you want to be part, so even within the family, there should be decisions taken equally. It should not just be about a vibrant social media, let's all
Sure.
gather, let's do a petition. It should be more than just that. And
Mm.
democracy requires us to have grace. It requires us to step back and listen to the voice. And sometimes, the majority voice, like J.S. Mill would say, that there could also be that the majority voice may not be the right voice for a lot of people. It may not be the majority. Let's say it's an ableist world where the majority is
Mm.
able. They would require, and that is how the world has been created, right? It's an
Mm.
ableist. All buildings are ableist because the
Yes.
majority voice at that time were people who were able, but we are all temporarily able. So why was it not that you created institute? Then you are bringing in, let's say, a kind of an elevator or whatever else you are building in, ramps. They come in later. So
Mm.
just an example to tell you how outreach and inclusivity always works. So democracy has to be deliberative and it has to be participatory. So you should be at your local levels involved with work, and you should have a certain grace and ability to be able to translate. Everything cannot be confrontationist. And young people have to be careful about their carbon footprint, of course, but
Social.
also their social media footprint, because then it is each one for themselves,
Mm.
because there's no movement. There's no one. You thought they were with you. There have been such, I mean, during the Battle of Seattle, or there is this woman who runs this whole campaign, and then finally they don't even find her. So, where is that
Mm.
accountability built into the system? So, it's important to build in accountability to your social media presence, especially if you think you're using it for democracy. So, if it is used for democracy, it can also be extremely anti democratic, social media. So, I think
Autocratic, in
one,
fact.
yeah, it can be. It is who is controlling that media. I mean,
Mm.
you've seen Facebook and other things, how information about privacy. So these are ultimately, at the end of the day, they are there is a certain sense of how it can be used, and ultimately it is the market which will control many of that. So frankly speaking, I would think that if young people want to learn about democracy, they should be associated with their local issues.
Mm.
They should look at their local, and they should always understand their own privileges. They should not become so entitled that every battle is about about that entitlement, their own entitlement. There has to be accountability, responsibility. All rights come with a certain degree of responsibility. It's important.
Very true, ma'am. We have just over 5 minutes left, so I'll ask you one last question, and then I will hand it over to Rahul to wrap up our conversation. Uh, let's bring the conversation back to the local scenario, as you were mentioning. How are students at Miranda House being empowered to be more accountable, democratic citizens and leaders?
Miranda House, as I mean, most people know, has been a very democratically decentralized space. I have been a teacher here. I'm now in the chair, and generally, I'm carrying out the legacy of that. But I'm also a complete believer in democracy, at the risk of the guns, at the risk of even being the person facing it, because every time it happens, even if it is against, let's say, against a so-called decision, I'm always somewhere objectively looking at the democratic functioning of it. So I am a student of democracy, and I'm also a believer, a passionate, let's say, advocate of democracy. So I would say Miranda House is extremely democratic. All systems within Miranda House are democratic. Students therefore get empowered once they become part of the college. The
Sure.
student societies run it, the teachers, everything about it is that. but how do they become accountable to it? That's important. And that, I think, comes from their teachers. They're working because there's always a teacher guiding them through that process. So that accountability is built in. Some of it is by speaking about it, but some of it is through practice. It is what you practice that young people will learn from it. And the other part of it is there is a lot of peer learning. And I would give importance more to peer learning, where they learn from their seniors and from others. And I think accountability is a two-way process. We also have to be accountable. Like you have put it very well. In fact, you have given me that idea that it needs to work both ways. So I would say yes. And I think even with young people, the idea of privilege and entitlement should be equally looked into as we on the other side look at it.
That's very well said, ma'am. That's very well said. All right. We have just about the last few minutes left, so I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about the Rustle of Book Club's podcast for all our listeners. It's curated and presented by Rahul Suri. I happen to be an educator who has worked very closely with the school that he graduated from, even though I haven't had the pleasure of teaching him myself. It's a platform where guests share their personal journeys, challenges, experiences. The show delves into their memories and insights, offering listeners a deeper understanding of their lives and perspectives. And the episodes are available on various platforms, including Spotify, Amazon Music, and TuneIn. Ma'am, one request on behalf of the Russell of Book Club, if you could write a letter to Rahul about your experience, uh, you know, uh,
Definitely.
share your
Definitely.
thoughts. Yeah. Thank you so
Definitely.
much. Rahul, I have left you with 3 minutes. Would you like to come in?
Yes, Rahul has a sore throat today, so ma'am would possibly not be able to understand what he's saying. Hence, I'm kind of pitching him for him. Ma'am, the note of gratitude that he has for you is immense, and he loved what you said about the sense of belongingness. You've actually hit the nail on the head. It is very, very important to make a person feel belonged. That should be an educator's ultimate goal. All right. The last question: would you be able to help people like Rahul Suri enter your college? Would there
Of
be any?
course, Rahul, this is an invitation to you. Please come to my college. Please speak to our young people. We want to begin with a podcast, and we would be very happy with having you lead it, learn from you, and happy to host you. So, thank you for reaching out, Rahul. I did not have a problem in understanding, or I think that time he did not have a sore throat, so there was absolute clarity in our conversation. Amazing young man. Thank you, Rahul. We invite you to Miranda House to be part of our conversations and to also guide us on how we can do better.
Well, his dream is certainly going to come true. He will visit Miranda House, and under your guidance, I'm sure he'll move to greater heights. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks to
you. Thank you, Mrs. Suri. Thank
also.
you. Thank you, Sukanya. Thank you for those lovely questions. I really enjoyed having this conversation. Thank you, Rahul.
I hope that
Thank you,
I've
Mrs.
done it
Suri.
justice, ma'am.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope I have also earned the privilege of your time.
For sure, I'm leaving with a sense of belonging with two very valuable people who I would love to stay in touch with. So both lots of love and support and best wishes to Rahul. And of course, Professor Nanda, all of my respect and gratitude to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Suri. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Professor Nanda. And I'm sure Rahul will now spearhead this meeting that he is definitely looking forward to. Thank you once again for sparing your time and speaking so effectively about democracy, sense of belongingness, and helping Rahul belong. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for making me belong, Rahul, to Rustle Group and your podcast. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Have a
Bye
great
bye
evening,
then.
everyone.
You too. You too.